I drove 4 hours to bury my mother. And when I got to her house, the house she raised me in, my key didn't work. The locks had been changed. My sister Claudette's car was in the driveway. The lights were on inside. I knocked until my knuckles were raw. She never opened that door. I was standing outside in the cold, my mother not even buried yet, and my own sister had already locked me out of everything. But what Claudette never knew was that 6 months earlier, Mom had asked me to help set up a security camera inside that house, and I still had the login. What that footage showed didn't just change everything. It destroyed her. If this story hits close to home, stay with me and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? My name is Marlene. I'm 43 years old, and I grew up in a yellow house on Crestfield Lane in Dayton, Ohio. It was the kind of house that looked warm from the outside. Flower boxes under the windows, a wind chime on the porch, a welcome mat that said home sweet home. But inside that house, there were two daughters who were never treated the same. And everyone who knew our family knew exactly which one was which. Claudette was the favorite. She always had been. From the time we were little girls, my mother Harriet made it clear in 100 small ways that Claudette was the one she had chosen. Claudette got the new clothes. I got the hand-me-downs. Claudette's artwork went on the refrigerator. Mine got a polite nod and then disappeared. When Claudette cried, my mother held her for an hour. When I cried, I was told to go to my room and calm down. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being dramatic. This was just Tuesday in our house. By the time we were teenagers, I had stopped expecting anything different. I had built this quiet little wall around myself, not out of bitterness, but out of survival. I told myself that someday I would have my own life, my own family, and none of it would matter anymore. And honestly, for a long time, that worked. I moved to Columbus at 22, built a life there, got a job I was proud of, made my own home. I called my mother every Sunday. I visited on holidays. I did everything a good daughter does, even when it never felt like enough. Claudette stayed close to home. She lived 40 minutes from Mom, which she reminded everyone of constantly. Like proximity was the same thing as love. She and her husband Conrad had built this whole identity around being the family caretakers. Every decision about Mom went through Claudette. Every doctor's appointment, every medication, every grocery run. Claudette controlled all of it. And my mother let her, because Harriet had always trusted Claudette more. That was just the way it was. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was at peace with it. I wasn't. When Mom got her diagnosis 2 years ago, early-stage congestive heart failure, I offered to help more. I called Claudette and said I could come down on weekends. I could take some of the appointments. I could contribute. Claudette's response was so casual it almost didn't register as cruel. She said, "We've got it handled, Marlene. You don't need to uproot your life." What she meant was, stay out of it. And like I had done my whole life, I stepped back. I kept calling Mom on Sundays. Mom kept her voice pleasant and distant, like she was talking to a neighbor she liked well enough but didn't really know. And the months passed. And then one cold Tuesday morning in March, my phone rang at 5:47 a.m. It was Claudette. She said, "Mom's gone." 2 words, no softness, no pause. Just 2 words, and then she told me the funeral arrangements were already being handled and she'd send me the details. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and I couldn't breathe. I don't remember getting dressed that morning. I don't remember packing my bag or locking my apartment door or getting on the highway. I just remember driving, the white lines on the road blurring, the sky still dark, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers went numb. 4 hours of silence except for the sound of my own breathing and the occasional sob I couldn't hold back. I kept thinking about the last time I had seen Mom in person. It was Thanksgiving. She had seemed tired but okay. She had patted my hand when I refilled her water glass and said, "You're a good girl, Marlene." I had held on to that like it was everything, because with Harriet, it basically was. I pulled onto Crestfield Lane just after 10 in the morning. The yellow house looked exactly the same from the outside. Wind chimes still on the porch. Flower boxes still there, though the flowers were dead from the winter. And Claudette's car, her silver SUV, sitting right in the driveway like she owned the place. Which, I was about to find out, she had already decided she did. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key. The one Mom had given me 15 years ago when she said, You should always have a way in, baby. I walked up the porch steps, put the key in the lock, and turned it. Nothing. I tried again. Jiggled it. Tried once more. The key didn't catch. The lock had been changed. I stood there for a moment just staring at the door, not fully understanding what I was looking at. Then I knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. I could hear movement inside. I could see the curtain in the front window shift slightly. Someone was in there. Someone was watching me stand on that porch. I knocked again, harder. Claudette, it's Marlene. Open the door. Nothing. I stepped back and looked up at the house. The lights were on in the living room. I could see the faint glow of the television. I called her phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I stood on that porch for 20 minutes in the cold March air, my breath coming out in little white clouds, my chest so tight I thought I might actually collapse. That's when I heard the front door of the house next door open. Dorothy, Mom's neighbor for over 20 years, a soft-spoken woman in her late 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, came out onto her porch with a cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked at me with an expression that broke my heart before she even said a word. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for this moment and dreading it. "Marlene, honey," she said quietly, "come sit on my porch for a minute." I walked over in a daze. She handed me a cup of coffee she had clearly just poured and sat down in the chair beside me. She didn't rush. She just looked at her hands for a moment and then said, "Claudette changed those locks the same night your mama passed. I saw the locksmith's truck here before 7 in the morning. Before 7 in the morning. My mother had barely been gone a few hours." I looked at Dorothy and I said, "What is happening?" She pressed her lips together and shook her head slowly. "I don't know the whole of it, but I know that girl has been moving things out of that house for the past 3 weeks. Boxes, furniture, your mama's things. 3 weeks, while Mom was still alive." The coffee cup shook in my hand. I sat on Dorothy's porch for a long time after that. Long enough for the coffee to go cold in my hands. Long enough for the morning to get brighter and colder at the same time. Dorothy didn't push me to talk. She just sat there beside me, which was more comfort than I had felt in years. But my mind was not quiet. My mind was doing that thing it does when something is too big to process all at once. It was breaking everything into small pieces and examining each one separately. Like if I looked at the pieces long enough, they'd stop adding up to what I knew they were adding up to. 3 weeks? Claudette had been moving things out of that house for 3 weeks, while Harriet was still alive, while my mother was still breathing in that back bedroom, still existing in the world. Claudette had already started dismantling her life, taking things, deciding what was hers, and nobody had called me, not once. I finally stood up, thanked Dorothy, and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the heat running, and I called Claudette again. This time she picked up on the second ring. Her voice was flat, controlled, the way it always got when she had already decided how a conversation was going to go. "Marlene." "Claudette, open the door. I just drove 4 hours. Our mother just died. Open the door." A pause. Then, "There's no reason for you to be in the house right now. The funeral is Thursday. I'll text you the address." I felt something move through my chest, not just anger, something older than anger. "That is my mother's house," I said. "I have every right to be inside it." "Actually," she said, and her voice dropped just slightly, took on that particular tone she had perfected over 40 years of being Harriet's chosen daughter. Calm, certain, faintly condescending. "You don't. Mom left everything to me, Marlene. The house, the accounts, everything. I'm the executor. I'm the sole beneficiary. So legally, that is my house now, and I'd appreciate it if you respected that." The line went quiet. I said, "That's not possible." She said, "I can have my attorney send you the paperwork if you'd like." And then she hung up. I stared at my phone screen until it went dark. My reflection looked back at me from the black glass, pale, hollow-eyed, sitting outside the house I grew up in like a stranger, like someone who had never belonged there. Which, I realized, was exactly how Claudette had always seen me. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the shock and the grief and the rage. It was something specific. A detail scratching at the back of my mind. Because I knew my mother. I knew Harriet. And as cold and distant as she had been with me over the years, as much as she had favored Claudette, there was one conversation, one specific Sunday phone call about 8 months ago, where Mom had said something that I had filed away without fully understanding why. She had said, "Marlene, I want you to know I've been fair. I've tried to be fair to both of you girls. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. I hadn't asked her what she meant. I had assumed she was just being reflective, the way older people get when they know their health is declining. But now those words were sitting in the center of my chest like a stone. I've tried to be fair to both of you girls. That didn't sound like a woman who had left everything to one daughter. That sounded like a woman who had been overruled. I drove to a coffee shop about 2 miles from Crestfield Lane, and I sat in a corner booth for 3 hours. I ordered something I didn't eat, and I started going through every piece of information I had. I called Mom's primary doctor's office. They wouldn't tell me anything. Privacy laws, I understood that. I called the hospital where she had spent her last 2 weeks, same result. I was not listed as next of kin on anything. Claudette had made sure of that. Quietly, systematically, over the past 2 years of controlling every appointment and every form, she had made herself the only name that mattered on paper. But then I remembered something. About 14 months ago, Mom had mentioned, just casually, in one of our Sunday calls, that she had finally gotten around to making a proper will. She said she had gone to an attorney, someone recommended by her friend from church, and that she felt better having it done. She hadn't gone into details, and I hadn't pressed. But she had said the attorney's name. I remembered it because it was unusual. She had said, "I went to see a Mr. Aldridge over on Pembroke Street. Very thorough man, made me feel like everything was in order." I opened my laptop right there in that coffee shop booth, and I searched. Aldridge Law Office, Pembroke Street, Dayton, Ohio. It came up immediately. Small estate planning firm, one attorney. I called the number before I could talk myself out of it. A receptionist answered. I explained who I was, daughter of Harriet, a client. I said I had reason to believe there may be a question about my mother's estate, and I needed to speak with Mr. Aldridge as soon as possible. There was a pause, some typing, and then she said he could fit me in the following morning at 9. I booked a motel room that night, 6 blocks from the yellow house on Crestfield Lane. I lay on top of the stiff motel bedspread in my clothes and stared at the water-stained ceiling and thought about my mother. Not the distant version of her, not the woman who looked through me at holidays. I thought about the Harriet from when I was very small, before Claudette's golden status had fully calcified, before the family dynamic had hardened into something permanent. I thought about a specific afternoon when I was maybe 6 years old, and Mom had let me help her bake a lemon cake, and she had put her hand over mine to guide the spoon, and she had laughed at something I said, really laughed, surprised and genuine. I had spent 40 years holding on to that afternoon like proof of something. I cried myself to sleep in that motel room, not pretty crying, the ugly kind, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep it scares you a little. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Aldridge's office at 5 minutes to 9. He was a trim man in his early 60s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the kind of attorney who had clearly spent decades handling the quiet grief of families. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk, and before I could even fully sit down, he said, "Miss Marlene, I was wondering when you'd come in." I looked at him. "You were expecting me?" He folded his hands on the desk and held my gaze steadily. "Your mother came to see me 14 months ago. She was very clear about her wishes, very specific." He paused. "The will I prepared for Harriet divided her estate equally between her 2 daughters." The room went very still. "Equally," I repeated. "Equally," he said. Which is why I was quite troubled when I received a copy of a different will last week. I leaned forward in that chair so fast I nearly knocked my coffee off his desk. "A different will," I said. "What do you mean, a different will?" Mr. Aldridge opened a folder in front of him slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he has handled enough family devastation to know that the next few minutes are going to change someone's life. He slid a document across the desk toward me. "This was filed with the probate court 4 days ago by your sister's attorney. It's dated 3 weeks before your mother passed." I picked it up. My hands were already shaking. I scanned the pages. The language was formal, dense, the way legal documents always are, but the meaning was simple enough. Everything to Claudette. The house, the savings accounts, the personal property, everything. My name appeared exactly once in the entire document, in a clause that left me a single item. My mother's ceramic mixing bowl. The one from the kitchen. The one we had used to make that lemon cake when I was 6 years old. I don't know if Claudette chose that on purpose. I don't know if she remembered that afternoon the way I did. But sitting in that office holding that document, it felt like the cruelest possible signature, like she had reached back into the one soft memory I had and used it as a weapon. I set the papers down on the desk and pressed my fingers flat against them to stop my hands from shaking. 3 weeks before she died, I said. Mom was on oxygen 3 weeks before she died. She was on 3 different medications. She could barely stay awake through a phone call. Mr. Aldridge nodded, carefully. That is a relevant observation. Is this legal? I asked. Can this just replace what you drew up? He removed his glasses and set them on the desk. A later will can supersede an earlier one, yes. However, and here he paused, and something shifted in his expression, something that made me sit up straighter. For a will to be valid, the person signing it must have what we call testamentary capacity. They must understand what they are signing, what they own, and who their heirs are. If there is evidence that your mother lacked that capacity at the time of signing, or that she was subjected to undue influence, the document can be challenged. Undue influence. The words landed in my stomach like something heavy. How do I prove that? I asked. Medical records will be essential, he said. Her condition at the time of signing. Any documentation of her cognitive state. Witness accounts. He paused again. And anything else that might speak to the circumstances under which this document was signed. Anything else? I drove back to the motel and sat on the edge of the bed and turned that phrase over and over in my mind. Anything else that might speak to the circumstances. And that's when it hit me. Quietly, the way the most important things always arrive, not in a flash, but in a slow, creeping recognition that starts in your chest and moves upward until it reaches your eyes. The security camera. 6 months ago, Mom had called me worried about a series of package thefts in her neighborhood. She had seen something on the local news and it had made her anxious. I had driven down that weekend, and we had set up a small indoor security camera together, positioned in the living room, angled toward the front door. A simple system, cloud-based, accessible through an app on my phone. Mom had watched me set it up and laughed a little at how complicated I made it sound. She had said, "You and your gadgets, Marlene?" I had set it up under my own email address. I still had the login. My phone was already in my hand. My fingers weren't steady when I opened the app. I had to type my password twice because I got it wrong the first time. The app loaded slowly. That agonizing kind of slow where the loading circle just spins and you sit there barely breathing. And then it connected. The camera was still live, still powered, still sitting in my mother's living room pointed at the front door, recording everything, uploading everything to the cloud automatically the way I had set it to do 6 months ago. I went to the archived footage. The system stored 30 days of recordings. I scrolled back to 3 weeks before Mom passed, the date printed on that fraudulent will, and I pressed play. The footage was grainy the way indoor cameras always are in low light, but clear enough for everything that mattered. The living room looked exactly as I remembered it. Mom's worn floral couch, the side table with her reading lamp, the family photographs arranged on the wall behind it. And there was Harriet, my mother, sitting in her recliner in the corner of the room, the one she had barely left in her final weeks. Even through the grainy footage, I could see the oxygen tube running under her nose. I could see how small she had gotten. How still. She was not asleep, but she was not fully present either. Her head was tilted slightly, her eyes half open, the particular blankness of someone heavily medicated, someone whose body was using every bit of its remaining energy just to keep breathing. And then Claudette walked into frame. She was dressed sharply, blouse pressed, hair done, the way she always dressed when she wanted to project control. Behind her came 2 people I didn't immediately recognize, a woman carrying a leather portfolio, and a man hovering near the doorway. It took me a moment, and then my stomach dropped completely because I recognized the man. It was Conrad, Claudette's husband, standing near the door with his arms crossed, watching. I turned the volume up as high as it would go. Claudette crouched down in front of Mom's recliner. She spoke in that particular soft voice she used when she wanted something, warm on the surface, with something harder underneath. Mom, honey, I need you to sign something for me. It's just paperwork. It's to make sure everything is taken care of. You want everything taken care of, right? Harriet turned her head slowly toward Claudette. She blinked. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't make out what she said. It's okay, Claudette said. It's simple. Here, I'll help you. The woman with the leather portfolio, the notary, stepped forward and opened it on the side table next to Mom's recliner. She placed a document in front of Harriet. I watched my mother look down at it. She didn't read it. She physically could not have read it. Her eyes weren't focusing. Her head kept drifting. Claudette picked up a pen and wrapped Harriet's fingers around it. Then she placed her own hand over Mom's hand and guided it slowly across the signature line. I watched it happen in complete silence in that motel room. My mother did not sign that will. Claudette signed it for her. I pressed pause on the footage, and I sat there for a very long time. The room felt like it was tilting. My ears were ringing. I had spent my entire life being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too quick to assume the worst about Claudette. I had spent 40 years doubting my own perception of what was happening in that family. And here it was, recorded, time-stamped, undeniable. I pressed record on my own phone, and I filmed the entire footage playback from start to finish. Then I called Mr. Aldridge. Mr. Aldridge picked up on the first ring. I don't know if it was something in my voice or if he had simply been waiting, but he didn't waste a single second on pleasantries. I told him what I had found. I told him about the camera, the footage, the notary, Conrad standing at the door, Claudette guiding Mom's hand across that signature line while Harriet sat there barely conscious with an oxygen tube under her nose. There was a long silence on his end, not the silence of someone processing shock, the silence of someone who had suspected something like this and was now hearing it confirmed. He said, "Marlene, do not share that footage with anyone else yet. Do not call your sister. Do not post anything, say anything, or send anything. Can you come back to my office first thing tomorrow morning and bring everything? Your phone, the recordings, all of it?" "Yes," I said. "Good." Another pause. "This changes things considerably." I barely slept that night. I lay in that motel room with my phone clutched in both hands like it was something I could lose if I let go. I watched the footage 3 more times. Not because I needed to. I had already seen it clearly enough that it would live behind my eyes for the rest of my life, but because some part of me kept waiting for it to look different. Kept waiting for an explanation that wasn't what it obviously was. It never came. The next morning, I was in Mr. Aldridge's office before he had even finished his coffee. He reviewed everything carefully, asked me to send him the cloud footage directly and the recorded playback as backup. He sat back in his chair and looked at me with an expression that was measured and serious, but also, underneath it, quietly furious in the way that decent people get furious when they witness something indecent. "This is will fraud," he said plainly. "What you have here is direct visual evidence of forgery under undue influence. Combined with your mother's medical records from those final weeks, which we will subpoena, and the testimony of her treating physicians regarding her cognitive state, this will is almost certainly invalidatable." Almost certainly. I held on to those 2 words. Almost certainly. I needed both of them. He filed the formal legal challenge that same afternoon. By the following morning, Claudette knew. She called me at 7:43 a.m. I watched her name light up my screen, and I let it ring twice before I answered. I wanted those 2 rings. I needed them. When I picked up, her voice was different. The controlled flatness was gone. Something rawer had replaced it. Not quite panic, but the close cousin of it. The voice of someone who has built something carefully and just heard the first crack run through it. "What did you do?" she said. It wasn't even a question. It was an accusation dressed up as a sentence. I said, "I told the truth, Claudette." "You have no idea what you're talking about. Mom wanted this. She told me herself she wanted me to have everything." "You were never there, Marlene. You were never around. You don't get to swoop in now." And she was on oxygen, I said quietly. She couldn't hold her own head up, and you put a pen in her hand. Dead silence. "I have the footage," I said. "I have all of it." The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. Then I heard something I had never heard from my sister in 40 years, something that sounded very much like fear. She hung up without another word. That afternoon, a letter arrived at my motel from Claudette's attorney. It was aggressive, full of legal language designed to intimidate, threatening counterclaims, disputing the validity of the camera footage, suggesting I had violated privacy laws by accessing the recording. I read it twice, set it on the nightstand, and texted Mr. Aldridge a photo of every page. His response came back in under 4 minutes. "Don't worry, they're scared. That's what scared people do." The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest about that because I think people imagine justice arrives quickly, cleanly, like a door swinging open all at once. It doesn't. It arrives in increments, in subpoenaed medical records and deposition transcripts and court dates that get rescheduled twice, in phone calls from Mr. Aldridge that start with, "We had a good development today," and phone calls that start with, We hit a small delay, but don't panic. It arrives in months of sitting with uncertainty so heavy it becomes part of your daily weight, something you carry from the bed to the kitchen to the car and back again. But it did arrive. Mom's medical records confirmed what the footage already showed. At the time of signing, Harriet had been on a combination of medications that her treating physician testified would have severely compromised her cognitive function. She had documented confusion, disorientation, and inability to follow multi-step instructions in the days surrounding that date. The physician was unambiguous on the stand. My mother had not possessed the legal capacity to execute a will on that day. The notary, faced with the footage and the medical testimony, cooperated with investigators. She admitted she had been contacted by Claudette, that she had been told the signing was a routine update, that she had not performed the proper capacity assessment she was legally required to conduct. Conrad, when deposed, gave answers so carefully evasive, they essentially confirmed everything without technically admitting anything. Claudette's attorney pushed back hard at every turn, but the evidence was a wall they could not get around. 4 months after I had stood on that porch with my key that didn't work, the probate court ruled. The fraudulent will was invalidated in its entirety. My mother's original will, the one Mr. Aldridge had prepared 14 months before her death, the one where Harriet had sat across from a thorough, decent man and said she wanted to be fair to both her daughters, was reinstated as the governing document. Everything split equally. The house, the accounts, all of it. Claudette did not look at me in the courtroom, not once. She sat beside her attorney with her jaw set and her eyes fixed on some point slightly above the judge's head, the way she had always looked when she was refusing to acknowledge something that contradicted her version of reality. Conrad sat in the row behind her. He stared at the floor. The extended family responded the way extended families always do, chaotically and in stages. Aunt Vera called me the evening of the ruling, her voice thick with something between guilt and relief. She said, "I should have seen it sooner, Marlene. I'm sorry." I told her I appreciated that. I meant it, even though sorry is a small word for a long silence. Some cousins reached out, some didn't. I stopped keeping score. What I kept instead was this. A Wednesday afternoon in early autumn, 3 weeks after the ruling, when I drove back to Crestfield Lane for the first time since the court date. The house looked the same from the outside. Wind chime on the porch, flower boxes, empty now. Welcome mat still there, a little more faded than I remembered. I had a new key in my hand, a proper one, cut from the original that a locksmith had matched for me. I walked up those porch steps slowly. I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly, cleanly, the way a key is supposed to turn. I pushed the door open and stood in the doorway for a long moment without going in. The house smelled like my mother. That specific combination of her hand lotion and old wood and something faintly floral that I had no name for but had known my entire life. It hit me all at once, and I pressed my hand flat against the doorframe to steady myself. I wasn't triumphant standing there. I wasn't vindicated in the clean, satisfying way I had imagined during all those months of fighting. I was just a daughter standing in her mother's house, missing her mother, wishing, the way you always wish when it's too late, that things had been different, that Harriet had found a way to love both her daughters equally while she was still alive to do it, that it hadn't taken a security camera and a courtroom to enforce what should have just been true. But I had told the truth. I had held on to it when everything was designed to make me let go, and the truth had held me back. I stepped inside, I closed the door behind me, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, it didn't lock me out.